Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we start today's case, I want to ask for your support by subscribing to my channel. Your support is very important to me, so please subscribe to follow more cases and encourage us. Click the like button and let's get into the case. SAS trapped in murky waters. The morning sun struggled to break through the haze that hung over Bayport Harbor. It was late August, and the combination of summer heat and industrial runoff had created a perfect storm of conditions along this stretch of the Florida Gulf Coast. Jason Reeves squinted against the glare as he surveyed the brownish water from his perch atop the main lifeguard tower. At 26, he was the senior lifeguard at Bayport Beach, a position that earned him both respect and responsibilities that sometimes kept him awake at night. "Water looks like shit today," remarked Mike Donovan, climbing up to join him. Mike was 22, built like a linebacker, with sun-bleached hair and the perpetual optimism of someone who hadn't yet had to pull a drowned tourist from the water. "Yeah," Jason agreed, eyes still scanning the horizon. "That storm surge pushed all the crap from the canal system right into our lap. Visibility's maybe 2 feet at best." The municipal stormwater drainage system emptied into Bayport Harbor through a series of outflow pipes that dotted the coastline. Last week's unseasonable storm had overwhelmed the aging infrastructure, sending millions of gallons of untreated runoff into the Gulf. The result was a murky soup of industrial waste, lawn fertilizer, and God knows what else, all swirling in. The bathtub warm waters that tourists still insisted on swimming in. "Mayor's office called this morning," Jason said, handing Mike a pair of binoculars. "They want water quality reports every 4 hours. Said something about the EPA breathing down their necks." Mike snorted. "Little late for that. That seafood. Processing plant's been dumping their waste here for years. Everyone knows it." "Yeah, well, now someone who matters knows it too," Jason replied. He checked his watch. "Training session in 30. Tell the others to meet at the South Buoy. We need to practice rescues in this soup before the beach fills up." Mike nodded and climbed down, leaving Jason alone with his thoughts. He'd been a lifeguard at Bayport for 8 summers now, working his way through college and then staying on when the department offered him the supervisor position. He knew these waters better than anyone. Their currents, their moods, their secrets. But lately, they'd been changing in ways that worried him. 3 miles offshore, changes were happening beneath the surface as well. A 9-foot female bull shark glided through the murky water, her powerful tail propelling her forward in an efficient, undulating motion. She was heavily pregnant, her belly swollen with pups that would be born in the next few weeks. Her acute senses were attuned to the environment around her, constantly processing information through specialized ampullae of Lorenzini that could detect the faintest electrical signals given off by living creatures. The bull shark was one of the ocean's most adaptable predators, capable of surviving in both salt and fresh water due to a unique adaptation in her kidneys. This ability allowed her to venture far up rivers and into estuaries where other sharks couldn't follow. It also made her particularly comfortable in the brackish, polluted waters now flowing from Bayport Harbor. The murky conditions weren't a hindrance for her. Bull sharks had evolved to hunt in low-visibility environments, relying on their electroreception and acute sense of smell rather than vision. The dirtier the water, the more at home she felt. And right now, the outflow from the harbor carried tempting scents: blood and viscera from the seafood processing plant, the organic compounds of decaying matter, the subtle electrical signals of fish disoriented by the sudden change in water quality. For humans, this deteriorating situation was cause for concern. For the bull shark, it was an opportunity. Back at the lifeguard headquarters, a weathered building with peeling blue paint that sat just above the high tide line, the morning briefing was underway. Jason stood before his team of 8 lifeguards, a diverse group ranging from college students working summer jobs to career water safety professionals. "Listen up," he said, his voice carrying over the hum of the air conditioning unit struggling against the August heat. "Water conditions are worse than yesterday. Visibility's down to about 2 feet, and there's a strong rip developing off the South Pier. EPA's got yellow flags up, but you know tourists, they see water, they swim." The team nodded. They'd all seen it before. Warnings ignored, safety boundaries crossed, alcohol-emboldened vacationers venturing out beyond their abilities. "We're going to run rescue drills in these conditions," Jason continued. "Mike, Sarah, and I will be victims. The rest of you will rotate through rescue scenarios. I want everyone comfortable performing a rescue when you can't see your hand in front of your face. Sarah Chen, the team's newest member, and an Olympic-caliber swimmer, raised her hand. What about the shark reports from Pelican Bay? That's only 10 miles down the coast. A few of the younger lifeguards exchanged glances. There had been increased shark sightings along the Gulf Coast this summer, mostly blacktips and the occasional spinner shark, species that rarely posed a threat to humans. But 2 weeks ago, a fisherman at Pelican Bay had reported something larger. Coast Guard hasn't confirmed anything, Jason replied evenly, but it's something to be aware of. The processing plant discharge could definitely attract them closer to shore. Just keep your eyes open. He didn't share his deeper concerns. Bull sharks were common in the Gulf, and unlike many shark species, they were known to be aggressive. The combination of poor visibility, increased organic matter in the water from the drainage overflow, and the added waste from the seafood plant created a perfect environment for attracting predators. It wasn't a question of if sharks were in the area, it was a question of what kind and how many. All right, he concluded. Gear up and meet at the South Buoy in 15. Standard rescue equipment plus emergency flotation markers if you've got them. As the team dispersed, Lisa Malone, the department's senior medical officer, pulled Jason aside. In her 40s, with skin weathered by decades in the sun, Lisa had seen it all during her 20 years with Bayport Beach Patrol. You're worried about something you're not saying, she observed quietly. Jason hesitated, then nodded. These conditions, they're bull shark heaven. Low visibility, lots of food in the water, and they're the one species that actually seems to prefer polluted waters. You want to close the beach? Lisa asked. Mayor would never approve it. Not in peak tourist season. Not without a confirmed sighting. He shook his head. We'll just be extra vigilant. Keep people closer to shore. Lisa studied him for a moment. Your call, boss, but maybe mention your concerns to the team before they get in that water. Jason nodded, grateful for her candor. Will do. 20 minutes later, the lifeguard team had assembled at the South Buoy, about 100 yards offshore. The water here was 8 feet deep, its surface an opaque brown-green that concealed everything below. A mild chop made it even harder to see, with small waves breaking over the heads of the shorter team members. All right, Jason called out, treading water at the center of the group. We're going to practice a standard rescue with complicating factors. I'll be the victim, unconscious and face down. Sarah and Mike, you'll create interference. Panicking swimmers who need to be managed while the primary rescue is performed. He looked around the circle, making eye contact with each team member. Before we start, a word of caution. Bull sharks prefer exactly these conditions. They're attracted to the kind of runoff we're seeing, and they hunt by sensing electrical impulses in the water, which means they don't need to see you to find you. A ripple of unease moved through the group. I'm not saying this to scare you, Jason continued, just to make you aware. Stay alert, stick with your partner, and remember your training. If you spot anything unusual, 3 short whistle blasts. Questions? There were none. The team had worked together long enough to understand the risks of their profession. Ocean rescue was inherently dangerous. They all knew that when they signed up. Okay, let's begin. Carlos and Amber, you're up first as rescuers. Everyone else create some space. As the team spread out, Jason took a deep breath and prepared to play the role of an unconscious swimmer. This was routine training, something they did at least once a month. But as he looked down into the murky water, an unfamiliar sense of unease settled in his stomach. Beneath the surface, the pregnant bull shark continued her methodical patrol. She had moved closer to shore over the past hour, drawn by the increasing concentration of organic material in the water. The runoff carried the scent of blood and viscera from the seafood processing plant, an irresistible lure for a predator, programmed to follow such signals to their source. The shark's lateral line, a sensory organ running along her flanks, detected subtle pressure changes in the water, movement, vibrations, the displacement caused by swimming bodies. Her brain processed this information automatically, cataloging potential threats and prey without conscious thought. Under normal circumstances, humans were not on the bull shark's menu. Like most sharks, she preferred prey that provided maximum calories for minimal effort: seals, sea lions, sick or injured fish. But in these murky conditions, with her senses bombarded by the chemical signals of potential food and the disorienting vibrations of multiple bodies in the water, the lines between prey and non-prey began to blur. The shark changed course, moving in a wide arc that brought her parallel to the shoreline. She was now in 20 feet of water, gradually ascending toward the surface where the concentration of interesting stimuli was highest. Her powerful sense of smell detected the metabolic byproducts of physical exertion, lactic acid, sweat, the subtle chemistry of adrenaline, all signaling the presence of active, living creatures nearby. In the polluted water, these chemical and electrical signals were the shark's primary navigation tools. She didn't need to see her surroundings clearly. In fact, murky water gave her a competitive advantage over prey that relied on vision to escape. The bull shark's entire evolutionary history had optimized her for hunting in precisely these conditions. And now her sensors detected a cluster of large bodies thrashing in the water ahead. The patterns were chaotic, disorganized, similar to the movements of injured or disoriented prey. To the shark's primitive but highly specialized brain, this registered as one thing: opportunity. At the South Buoy, the rescue drills were progressing smoothly despite the challenging conditions. Carlos and Amber had successfully rescued Jason, demonstrating proper technique for securing and transporting an unconscious victim back to shore. Now it was Taylor and Deshawn's turn, with Mike playing the role of a struggling swimmer caught in a rip current. Jason had moved to the perimeter of the training area, treading water while observing the drill. Sarah floated nearby, both of them watching the rescue technique with critical eyes, occasionally exchanging observations about what could be improved. "They're getting better," Sarah remarked. "Taylor's approach is much smoother than last month." Jason nodded. "So far, so good." They moved deeper until the water reached their chests. Jason felt the familiar lift as his body became neutrally buoyant, the sensation both comforting and unsettling. For most of his life, this feeling had represented freedom, the human body liberated from gravity's constraints. Now it also triggered memories of vulnerability, of being suspended helplessly as a predator closed in. He pushed those thoughts away, focusing instead on the present moment, the clarity of the water, the warmth of the sun on his shoulders, Elena's steady presence beside him. "I'm going to swim a little," he announced, as much to himself as to her. Without waiting for a response, he leaned forward and propelled himself with his arms, allowing his body to level out in the water. His natural leg kicked instinctively, while the prosthetic created more drag than propulsion. The swimming specialists had warned him that his technique would need to be completely relearned, that he would need to compensate for the imbalance, develop new muscle groups, find a rhythm that accommodated his changed body. For now, though, it was enough simply to be horizontal in the water again, face down with the seafloor visible below. He raised his head to breathe and saw Elena swimming alongside him, her face carefully neutral but her eyes watchful. "I'm okay," he assured her, treading water. "Really?" She smiled then, relief evident in her expression. "You look good out here." Natural. They swam parallel to the shore for nearly half an hour, never venturing beyond standing depth, Jason gradually reacquainting himself with the sensations of moving through water with his altered body. It wasn't the effortless experience it had once been. The prosthetic created an awkward asymmetry that required constant adjustment, but it was swimming nonetheless. He was back in the ocean, back in his element. As they finally waded back to shore, exhausted but exhilarated, Jason felt a weight lift that he hadn't fully acknowledged was there. He hadn't conquered his fear. That would be a longer process, perhaps a lifelong one, but he had faced it. He had returned to the water on his own terms, reclaiming some small piece of the identity that had been taken from him in those murky depths 6 months earlier. On the beach, they dried off in companionable silence, both recognizing the significance of what had just occurred. Finally, Elena spoke. "How does it feel?" Jason considered the question carefully. Like visiting somewhere I used to live. Familiar, but different. I know I belong here, but I have to find my place all over again." She nodded, understanding. "It'll come back, different, but maybe better in some ways. You see things now that most people never have to see." He knew she wasn't just talking about the shark or the attack, but about the entire experience, a brutal reality of becoming prey, the humbling process of recovery, the recalibration of what constituted normalcy in his new life. These were perspectives that changed a person permanently, for better or worse. "I got a call from Mike yesterday," he said, changing the subject. The city's finally implementing those water quality reforms we were pushing for. Testing twice weekly, public reporting, automatic beach closure triggers if certain levels are exceeded. Eleanor's eyebrows rose in surprise. Really, what changed? Tourist season ended, Jason replied with a wry smile, and apparently there were some EPA inspectors nosing around the processing plant last month. Suddenly the mayor's very concerned about environmental stewardship. It was a small victory, but a meaningful one. In the month since the attack, Jason had channeled much of his recovery energy into advocacy, pushing local officials to acknowledge the connection between water pollution and increased shark activity near shore. He had given interviews to environmental journalists, connected with marine conservation groups, even testified at a state Senate committee hearing on coastal water quality. None of this would bring back his leg or erase the trauma of what had happened. But it gave purpose to his experience, transformed it from a random tragedy into a catalyst for change. The shark that had attacked him was still out there somewhere, perhaps with a new litter of pups by now, following the ancient imperatives of its species. Jason didn't begrudge it that existence, but he wanted to ensure that human activities didn't artificially increase the chances of such encounters in the future. "Ready to head back?" Elena asked, packing up their gear. Jason looked out at the water once more, its surface catching the midday light in countless tiny reflections. He knew that beneath that beautiful facade lay dangers both natural and human-created, sharks and rip currents, pollution and fishing debris, the countless hazards that humans prefer to ignore when admiring the ocean's beauty. But it was still the ocean, still the place that had shaped his life before the attack, and would continue to shape it after, albeit in different ways. He would never swim with the same unthinking confidence again, never venture into murky water without remembering what waited there. Yet he would swim. He would return to these waters again and again, gradually expanding the boundaries of what felt safe, reclaiming territory from his fear inch by inch. "Yeah," he said finally, turning toward the parking lot. "Let's go home." As they walked up the beach, Jason's gait still marked by the subtle asymmetry of his prosthetic, he felt a complex emotion he couldn't quite name, something between acceptance and defiance, between respect for the power that had nearly killed him and determination not to be defined by that encounter. The shark continued its ancient patrol somewhere beneath the Gulf's surface, neither malevolent nor benign, but simply existing as it had for millions of years before humans entered its domain. Jason's path had crossed with it once, with devastating consequences. That intersection of human and shark, land dweller and sea creature, had altered the trajectory of his life irrevocably. But it hadn't ended his story. It had merely changed it, added new dimensions of challenge and meaning, forced growth in unexpected directions. And in that sense, perhaps, it had been a beginning as much as an ending. Jason glanced back at the water one last time before climbing into the car. He would return next week, and the week after that, each time venturing a little farther, staying a little longer, reclaiming piece by piece the relationship with the ocean that had defined him for so long. The shark had taken his leg, but not his future. The future would be different than he had imagined, harder in some ways, richer in others, fundamentally altered by those few terrible minutes beneath the murky surface of Bayport Harbor. But it would be his future nonetheless, and he would face it, one step at a time, with the same determination that had carried him through the darkest days of his recovery, not as a victim, but as a survivor, not defined by what he had lost, but by what he had endured and overcome. 6 months after being dragged into the primal darkness at the edge of human experience, Jason Reeves was swimming again, different, damaged, but undeniably alive, and moving forward, stroke by stroke, into whatever waited ahead. Still needs work on the approach angle, but the recovery technique is solid. He was about to call out some guidance when something brushed against his leg beneath the surface, something large and solid that moved with purpose. The contact was brief but unmistakable, not the random touch of seaweed or debris, but the deliberate investigation of something alive. Jason froze, his body tensing as adrenaline surged through his system. Years of training kicked in, overriding the instinctive panic that tried to take hold. He slowly turned in the water, scanning the opaque surface around him, seeing nothing but the brownish-green murk. "Sarah," he said quietly, keeping his voice steady. "Move toward the group, slowly." Sarah, sensing the tension in his voice, didn't question the instruction. She began to sidestroke toward the main group, about 15 yards away. Jason followed, maintaining a calm exterior while his mind raced. It could have been anything. A large fish, a sea turtle, even a piece of submerged debris pushed by the current. But his instincts told him otherwise. The touch had felt too purposeful, too solid. In these waters, at this time of year, with these conditions, there was one explanation that made more sense than any other. He had nearly reached the group when he felt it again, this time a more deliberate contact against his calf, the unmistakable sandpaper texture of shark skin sliding past his leg. Jason's heart hammered in his chest, but he forced himself to move smoothly, avoiding any erratic movements that might trigger a predatory response. "Everyone," he called, his voice carrying across the water with practiced authority. "Group together, face outward in a circle. We're heading back to shore as a unit." Mike, instantly alert to the change in Jason's tone, stopped the drill. "What's up, boss?" "Possible shark contact," Jason replied evenly, not wanting to cause panic but knowing the team needed accurate information. "No visual confirmation yet. Standard response protocol." The team immediately formed a defensive circle, each lifeguard scanning a sector of the surrounding water. They began to move as a unit toward shore, approximately 80 yards away. "Nice and easy," Jason instructed. "Regular, smooth movements. No splashing." Below them, the bull shark circled once more, her keen senses mapping the strange formation of humans above. The tight grouping confused her predatory instincts. It registered as a single large organism rather than multiple potential prey items. She continued to circle, her behavior shifting from investigative to more assertive as her initial caution gave way to growing interest. The bull shark accelerated slightly, her muscular body arcing through the water with effortless power. At 9 feet long and nearly 500 pounds, she was at the upper end of the size range for her species, a dominant predator accustomed to getting what she wanted. And right now, the electrical impulses emanating from the group of humans triggered ancient hunting algorithms in her brain. On the surface, the lifeguard team maintained their formation, moving steadily toward shore. They were now about 60 yards from the beach, the water depth having decreased to around 6 feet. "I think we're good," Mike said cautiously. "Whatever it was, it's probably—" The rest of his sentence was cut off as the water beneath Jason erupted. In an instant of terrible clarity, he saw the massive grey-brown shape rise toward him, felt the displacement of water, as nearly half a ton of predator surged upward. Then came the impact, a powerful body slamming into his lower half, jaws clamping around his right thigh with crushing force. Pain, unlike anything Jason had ever experienced, exploded through his body as the shark's triangular teeth sliced through his wetsuit and into the muscle beneath. In that moment, training, experience, and conscious thought were all obliterated by the primal horror of being in the jaws of a predator. The shark shook her head violently, the movement designed to tear flesh from bone, a feeding behavior perfected over millions of years of evolution. Jason felt himself being pulled under, the world above disappearing as he was dragged below the surface into the murk. In those fractions of a second, as shock began to overwhelm his system, a detached part of his mind identified his attacker, the broad, blunt snout, the massive girth, the distinctive behavior. Bull shark, one of the most dangerous species to humans due to their tendency to attack in shallow water and their powerful bite force. Above the surface, chaos erupted as the other lifeguards registered what was happening. Training kicked in immediately, overriding the natural instinct to flee. "Shark attack! Position 3!" Mike bellowed, using the team's emergency code. "Dishorn emergency transport. Carlos, call it in." Sarah, the closest to Jason when he was taken under, didn't hesitate. She dove into the churning, bloody water, following the bubbles and disturbance that marked where Jason had disappeared. The shark had pulled him down and was now thrashing from side to side, its massive body creating a vortex of churning water and spreading blood. Underwater, Jason fought against the crushing pressure on his leg. The initial shock was giving way to survival instinct. He remembered his training: eyes, gills, snout, the vulnerable areas. With desperate strength, he drove his right fist into the shark's eye, connecting with the soft tissue with all the force he could muster in the water. The bull shark reacted immediately, releasing her grip slightly as the unexpected pain registered. It was enough for Jason to twist partially free. though the movement caused the teeth to tear deeper through his thigh muscle. Sarah reached them in that moment, her hands finding Jason in the murky water by following the trail of bubbles. The shark, temporarily distracted by the blow to its eye but still locked onto Jason's leg, now registered this new presence. Sarah's arrival complicated the predator's feeding behavior, a second potential threat approaching its secured prey. On the surface, Mike had reached them, with Amber close behind. They could see nothing below, but a violent disturbance in the water and spreading patches of red. "Drop marker," Mike ordered, and Amber deployed the emergency flotation marker, a bright orange buoy that would help the rescue boat locate them. Beneath the surface, Sarah had grabbed Jason under the arms and was trying to pull him upward, but the shark maintained its grip. In the murky water, she could barely make out the massive shape of the predator, but she could feel its power as it continued to thrash, trying to tear away a portion of Jason's leg. Jason, fading from blood loss and oxygen deprivation, struck the shark again, this time raking his fingers across its sensitive gill slits. This more significant pain stimulus caused the shark to release its grip temporarily, backing off a few feet in the cloudy water. Sarah seized the moment, using all her strength to pull Jason toward the surface. They broke through together, Jason gasping for air, his face contorted in agony. The water around them was stained crimson. "I've got him!" Sarah shouted as Mike and Amber reached them. "Get him on the board!" Mike had already deployed the rescue board they'd brought for training. Together, they hoisted Jason's traumatized body onto it, the severity of his injury immediately apparent. His right thigh was mangled, deep lacerations exposing muscle and bone, blood pulsing from the wound with each heartbeat. Tourniquet. Amber was already reaching for the medical kit strapped to the board, extracting the combat-style tourniquet that was standard equipment for their team. With practiced movements, she secured it around Jason's upper thigh, cranking the windlass until the blood flow visibly decreased. "We need to move now," Mike's voice carried over the water to the rest of the team, who were already positioned to create a protective corridor back to shore. On the beach, alarms were sounding. Carlos had successfully radioed in the emergency, and the beach evacuation protocol was in effect. As they began to move the board toward shore, Sarah, still in the water alongside them, suddenly jerked backwards with a startled cry. The bull shark, having regrouped after the temporary retreat, had returned and bumped her forcefully from below, a classic prelude to an attack. "It's back!" she shouted, scrambling onto the rescue board alongside Jason, her legs bleeding from where the shark's rough skin had abraded her. The bull shark, now fully in predatory mode and stimulated by the blood in the water, began to circle the rescue board. From shore, beachgoers who had gathered at the commotion could see the distinctive dorsal fin cutting through the surface as it made increasingly tight loops around the lifeguards. "Keep moving," Mike commanded, he and Amber pushing the board while scanning the water around them. The rest of the team closed ranks, creating a human barrier between the shark and the rescue board. The bull shark made another pass, this time striking the board from below with enough force to nearly capsize it. Jason groaned in pain as the impact jostled his mangled leg. "Hold steady." Mike braced the board while Amber maintained pressure on Jason's wound. They were still 40 yards from shore, agonizingly close yet so far in their vulnerable position. On the beach, the emergency response was in full swing. Lisa Malone had set up a triage area at the lifeguard headquarters, and paramedics were arriving with advanced life support equipment. The beach had been cleared of civilians, with police tape establishing a perimeter to keep onlookers back. In the water, the lifeguard team continued their desperate journey toward shore, the shark still circling. They were now in about 4 feet of water, too shallow for the shark to maneuver effectively above the surface, but still deep enough for it to pose a lethal threat. The bull shark made one final determined approach, accelerating toward the group with predatory focus. But as it neared, a sudden blast shattered the tension. A Coast Guard officer on the shoreline had fired a specialized shark deterrent, essentially a loud underwater firecracker designed to create a concussive sound wave that disoriented sharks. The sigh effect was immediate. The bull shark veered away sharply, disappearing into the murky water. Its retreat didn't mean it was gone for good, but it bought precious seconds for the rescue team. "Move, move, move!" Mike's voice cracked with the strain as they pushed forward through the shallowing water. Other lifeguards rushed out from shore to meet them, helping. to carry the board the final distance. As they reached the dry sand, Jason was barely conscious, his skin ashen from blood loss despite the tourniquet. Lisa and the paramedics descended on him immediately, establishing IV access and administering fluids while assessing the devastating injury to his leg. BP's 80-40 and dropping, one paramedic reported. We need air transport. Lisa nodded grimly. Chopper's already inbound. ETA 3 minutes. She turned to the team. You did good, we've got him now. Mike, Sarah, and the others stood back, their bodies still coursing with adrenaline, watching as medical professionals worked to stabilize their leader. Sarah's legs were bleeding from multiple abrasions where the shark's skin had scraped her, but she barely noticed, her focus entirely on Jason. He saved my life, she said quietly to Mike. When it came back, it was coming for me. He kicked it. With his good leg made it turn away. Mike put an arm around her shoulders. That's who he is. The distant thrum of helicopter rotors grew louder as the medevac unit approached. On the beach, the organized chaos of emergency response continued, with police establishing a wider perimeter and Coast Guard vessels now patrolling offshore, searching for the shark. Out in the murky waters of Bayport Harbor, the bull shark had retreated to deeper water. The concussive blast had caused her temporary discomfort, disrupting her sensitive electroreception organs and creating a painful pressure in her inner ear. But these effects were temporary, and she continued to patrol the area, her primitive brain still processing the encounter. The shark had successfully secured prey, only to have it wrestled away, an unusual outcome for such a dominant predator. The blood in the water still called to her, but for now she maintained a cautious distance, her behavior shifting from active hunting to a more opportunistic approach. She would remain in the area, drawn by the rich feeding opportunities provided. By the polluted runoff, a potentially lethal presence in waters meant for human recreation. Back on shore, Jason was being loaded into the helicopter, his vital signs stabilizing somewhat thanks to the rapid medical intervention. The chopper would take him to Tampa Bay Medical Center, the nearest Level 1 trauma center, with specialists experienced in marine animal attacks. As the helicopter lifted off, Lisa turned to the exhausted lifeguard team. I need statements from all of you. This is going to trigger protocols none of us have had to use before. Indeed, the machinery of official response was already grinding into motion. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission had been notified, as had the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Shark Research Division. The attack would be catalogued, analyzed, and added to the relatively small database of confirmed bull shark attacks on humans. For the Bayport Beach Patrol, however, the bureaucratic aftermath was secondary to the more immediate concern for their leader and friend. As the helicopter disappeared over the horizon, Mike turned to Lisa. What are his chances? He asked bluntly. Lisa's expression was grim but measured. The tourniquet saved his life, no question. But that leg? She shook her head. It's bad. Mike, really bad. Whether they can save it depends on a lot of factors. How much vascular damage there is, infection risk. She placed a hand on his shoulder. But Jason's strong. If anyone can pull through this, he can. The town of Bayport, with its population of just under 15,000, had never experienced a shark attack before. By mid-afternoon, news vans from Tampa and St. Petersburg had begun arriving, setting up outside the police cordon that now surrounded the beach. The mayor, Harold Whitmore, had rushed back from a conference in Orlando and was closeted with the police chief, the head of emergency services, and representatives from the Coast Guard and state environmental agencies. At Tampa Bay Medical Center, Jason was wheeled directly from the helipad to the trauma unit, where a team of surgeons was already prepped and waiting. The initial assessment confirmed what the first responders had feared. The damage to his right thigh was catastrophic. The bull shark's serrated teeth had shredded muscle, severed blood vessels, and crushed bone. The immediate concern was saving his life. Saving his leg would be a secondary battle. Begin debridement and explore the femoral artery, the lead surgeon instructed as they worked. We need to establish if there's viable circulation below the trauma site. For the next 4 hours, the surgical team fought to repair the damage, painstakingly reconnecting blood vessels, removing devitalized tissue, stabilizing bone fragments, and irrigating the wound to reduce the risk of infection, a significant concern with shark bites as their mouths harbor numerous bacteria. In the surgical waiting room, Mike and Sarah had arrived after giving their statements to authorities and being treated for their own, much less severe injuries. They were joined by Jason's parents, who had driven up from Naples after receiving the devastating call, and his girlfriend Elena, a marine biology Ph.D. candidate at the University of South Florida. "How could this happen?" Jason's mother asked, her voice hollow with shock. "He's been swimming in those waters his whole career." Mike, still in his uniform with Jason's dried blood staining the fabric, tried to explain about the pollution, the runoff, the perfect storm of conditions that had created an environment irresistible to a bull shark. But the technical details seemed inadequate in the face of such a personal tragedy. Elena, whose research focused on shark behavior, filled in the gaps with professional detachment that barely masked her emotional turmoil. Bull sharks are uniquely adapted to tolerate polluted, brackish water. They actually prefer it sometimes, and they're one of the few species known to attack humans unprovoked. "Will they catch it?" Jason's father asked, his weathered face tight with anger and concern. Sarah and Mike exchanged glances. "The Coast Guard and FWC have boats out," Mike explained. "But in those conditions, with that much blood in the water attracting other predators, it's unlikely they'll identify the specific shark." The reality was even more complicated than that. Bull sharks were not an endangered species, but they were protected under Florida's marine conservation laws. Even if the specific shark were identified, the protocols for dealing with it were complex and dependent on multiple factors, including the severity of the attack and the assessment of wildlife officials. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The AI system designed to protect humans from shark attacks was often more focused on protecting sharks from humans. In most cases, this balanced approach made ecological sense. Shark attacks were vanishingly rare compared to the number of sharks killed by humans each year. But sitting in that waiting room, with Jason fighting for his life behind the surgical doors, these statistical realities offered little comfort. Just after 8 p.m., the lead surgeon emerged, his scrubs spattered with blood, his face showing the strain of hours of intense concentration. The group rose as one, bracing for news. "He's stable," the surgeon began, and a collective breath was released. "We've managed to restore blood flow to the lower leg and repair the major vessels. The muscular damage was extensive and there was significant bone involvement, but we've stabilized everything for now." "So he'll keep his leg?" Elena asked, her scientific mind cutting to the core question. The surgeon's hesitation spoke volumes. "It's still too early to say with certainty. The next 48 hours will be critical. We're concerned about compartment syndrome, infection, and the overall viability of the tissue. But," he added, seeing their faces fall, "Jason is young, extremely fit, and received exemplary care at the scene. Those factors significantly improve his chances." "When can we see him?" Jason's mother asked. "He's in recovery now and will be moved to the ICU within the hour. Once he's settled, you can see him briefly, 2 at a time." The surgeon paused. "I should prepare you. He's intubated and heavily sedated. He won't be conscious and the wound site is extensively bandaged." As the surgeon departed to continue his rounds, the group settled back into the tense vigil of waiting. Outside the hospital windows, darkness had fallen over Tampa Bay, the lights of the city reflecting on the water. The same water where, just hours earlier, their lives had been irrevocably changed. Back in Bayport, a different kind of storm was brewing. News of the attack had spread rapidly, and the small coastal community was in turmoil. The beach remained closed, with police tape and barricades preventing access, but that hadn't stopped crowds from gathering at the perimeter, straining for a glimpse of where the attack had occurred. Mayor Whitmore had held a press conference, flanked by grim-faced officials from various agencies. His carefully crafted statement emphasized the unprecedented nature of the incident and assured the public that all appropriate safety measures were being implemented. But the questions from reporters had been pointed and uncomfortable. Is it true that water quality warnings were ignored in the days leading up to the attack? Has the seafood processing plant been cited for illegal dumping? And could this have attracted the shark? Why were lifeguards training in water with such poor visibility? The mayor had deflected as best he could, promising a full investigation while emphasizing the heroic response of the lifeguard team. But as the cameras stopped rolling, the real conversations began about liability, about the economic impact on a town dependent on beach tourism, about who would be blamed when the lawsuits inevitably began. In a conference room at City Hall, the recriminations were already flying. "We should have closed that beach days ago," insisted Diane Mercer, the city's environmental compliance officer. "The water quality tests were off the charts. I sent those reports to everyone in this room." "And do what?" countered George Phelps, representing the Chamber of Commerce. "Tell tourists sorry, no beach this week. Do you have any idea what that would do to the local economy? We're already struggling after that red tide last year." The police chief, Tom Ramirez, shook his head. "This isn't about money. A man nearly died today. A man who works for this city, protecting our citizens. And we all feel terrible about that," the mayor interjected. "But we need to be practical about how we move forward. The media is already calling this Jaws Florida edition. The damage to our reputation could last for years." The debate continued well into the night, the same arguments circling like the shark that had upended their community's sense of safety. By morning, a narrative was taking shape, one that acknowledged the tragedy while emphasizing its rarity, that promised new safety protocols while reassuring visitors that Bayport remained a premier vacation destination. It was a narrative designed to minimize liability and maximize damage control, and it had very little to do with the reality of what had happened in those murky waters. At Tampa Bay Medical Center, Jason surfaced slowly from sedation around 3 a.m., his consciousness floating up through layers of narcotic fog. The first sensation was pain, a deep throbbing agony in his right leg that even the powerful medications couldn't fully mask. Then came awareness of his surroundings, the rhythmic beeping of monitors, the cool flow of oxygen through a nasal cannula, the dim lighting of the ICU. Elena was asleep in a chair beside his bed, her hand resting near his but not touching, as if afraid to disturb the medical equipment surrounding him. The simple sight of her, dark hair falling across her face, the familiar curve of her cheek, anchored him in the chaos of his situation. As memory returned in fragments, so did the terror of those moments underwater, the pressure of jaws clamping down, the vortex of churning water, the primitive certainty of being prey. Jason's heart rate spiked, triggering an alarm on one of the monitors. Elena jerked awake, immediately alert. "Jason, you're okay. You're in the hospital." She reached for the call button. "I'm going to get the nurse." A moment later, a night nurse appeared, efficiently checking his vitals and adjusting his medication. "Try to stay calm, Mr. Reeves. You're doing well, but we need to keep your heart rate stable." She made a note in his chart. "The doctor will be in soon to check on you." Elena moved closer once the nurse had gone, carefully taking his hand. "You scared the hell out of us," she said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "But you're going to be okay. The surgery went well." Jason tried to speak, but his throat was raw from the intubation tube that had been removed only hours earlier. Eleanor offered him ice chips, which he accepted gratefully. "The team," he managed finally, his voice a rasp. "All safe," she assured him. "Sarah has some lacerations on her legs, but nothing serious. Everyone else is fine. They've been here taking turns. Your parents just went to the hotel to rest." Jason nodded, relief washing through him. Then came the question he was afraid to ask, but needed to know. "My leg?" Elena's hesitation told him everything. "They're doing everything they can. The next day or so will tell us more." He closed his eyes, absorbing this reality. As a lifeguard, his body was his tool, his means of saving others. The possibility of losing his leg wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was the end of the career that defined him. "The shark," he said after a moment. "Bull shark, female, big." Elena nodded. "From your team's description, probably around 9 feet, likely pregnant given the size and behavior." Her academic knowledge provided a framework for understanding what had happened, a way to process the trauma through the lens of science rather than pure horror. "It was checking us out before the attack," Jason continued, the effort of speaking draining his limited energy. "I felt it. Should have." He trailed off, the unfinished thought clear. Should have called off the training, should have recognized the danger, should have protected his team. Better. "Don't," Eleanor said firmly. "This isn't on you. Bull sharks are ambush predators. In that water, with those conditions, there's no way anyone could have predicted or prevented what happened." But Jason wasn't so easily absolved. As consciousness began to slip away again, Pulled down by the powerful medications and his body's desperate need for healing sleep, his mind returned to the murky waters of Bayport Harbor, to the moment when he'd felt that first contact against his leg and known on some primal level what it meant, to the decision to continue rather than immediately retreat to shore. In those last moments before sleep reclaimed him, one thought surfaced with terrible clarity. He had failed in his most fundamental duty as a lifeguard, to recognize danger before it struck. The next day dawned bright and clear over the Gulf Coast, the kind of perfect summer morning that typically drew thousands to Bayport's beaches. But today, the sand was empty, the shore patrol vehicles and warning signs creating an apocalyptic scene where there should have been sunbathers and sand castles. Out beyond the shoreline, 4 Coast Guard vessels patrolled in a grid pattern, accompanied by a Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission boat equipped with specialized shark detection equipment. A spotter plane made regular passes overhead, searching for the distinctive shadow of a large shark in the slowly clearing water. The hunt wasn't officially called a hunt. The press releases carefully described it as enhanced monitoring and public safety assessment. But everyone involved knew what they were looking for: a 9-foot female bull shark, likely pregnant, with a possible injury to one eye. If found, the shark wouldn't be killed, at least not officially. The public relations disaster of destroying a pregnant protected species would be too great, especially with environmental groups already mobilizing over the pollution issues that had contributed to the attack. Instead, it would be relocated, a euphemism that left considerable room for interpretation once the shark was away from public view. On the FWC vessel, marine biologist Dr. Marcus Reed monitored the sonar equipment with practiced eyes. At 52, he had spent most of his career studying the bull sharks of the Gulf Coast, and the previous night's frantic call from the state authorities had pulled him from a research expedition off the dry Tortugas. "Anything?" asked Captain Miller of the Coast Guard, stepping into the cramped electronics room. Reed shook his head. Several smaller sharks, black tips mostly, drawn by the blood in the water from yesterday, but nothing matching our target. He gestured to the sonar display. "In these conditions, with this many potential contacts, it's going to be like finding a needle in a haystack, and that's assuming she's still in the area." "You think she's moved on?" the captain asked. "Bull. Sharks don't typically establish territories the way some species do," Reed explained. "They follow food sources. Right now, with all this organic matter in the water from the runoff, plus the processing plant discharge, this is prime feeding ground. So no, I don't think she's gone far." The captain nodded grimly. "Keep looking. The mayor's breathing down our necks on this one. Tourism's the lifeblood of these small coastal towns." Reed bit back his first response, that perhaps tourism should take a back seat to water quality and public safety, and returned to his monitoring. As a scientist, he understood the bull shark's behavior as a product of evolution and instinct, not malice. The shark wasn't evil. It was simply doing what millions of years of natural selection had programmed it to do. The real villains in this story were human: the officials who ignored water quality warnings, the corporation that treated the ocean as a waste disposal system, the economic pressures that prioritized tourist dollars over environmental health. But he also understood that in the court of public opinion, the shark would always be the monster. Humans needed a tangible enemy, something to hunt and vanquish to restore their sense of control. The complex web of human decisions that had created perfect conditions for a shark attack was too abstract, too distributed to satisfy that primal need for justice. So they would search for the shark, and if they found it, they would relocate it, and everyone could pretend that the problem had been solved, until the next time. At Tampa Bay Medical Center, the team of specialists gathered outside Jason's room for morning rounds. The lead surgeon, Dr. Catry, reviewed the overnight notes with a furrowed brow. "Elevated white count, increased drainage from the wound site," he summarized for his colleagues, "and the Doppler pulses in the foot are weaker than I'd like to see." "Infection?" asked one of the residents. "Almost certainly," Dr. Catry confirmed. "Shark mouths harbor a complex mixture of bacteria. We've got him on broad-spectrum antibiotics, but we're still waiting on the final culture results to see what we're dealing with specifically." "And the compartment pressures?" inquired the vascular specialist. "Borderline," Dr. Catry replied. "We're monitoring every hour. If they increase, we'll need to do a fasciotomy immediately." The unspoken concern hung in the air. Compartment syndrome, a condition where pressure builds within muscles, reducing blood flow and potentially causing permanent damage, could necessitate amputation if it progressed too far. Combined with the infection risk and the extensive tissue damage already present, Jason's prognosis was increasingly concerning. "Let's go talk to him," Dr. Khatri decided. "He deserves to know where things stand." Inside the room, Jason was more alert than the previous night, though pain was etched deeply in his face. His parents sat on one side of the bed, Elena on the other. They all looked up expectantly as the medical team entered. "Good morning, Jason," Dr. Khatri began, his tone professional but kind. "How are you feeling today?" "Like I got bit by a shark," Jason replied, his attempt at humor undermined by the strain in his voice. Dr. Khatri acknowledged this with a small smile. "I need to examine your leg, and then we should talk about next steps." The next few minutes were excruciating as the surgical team carefully removed the dressings from Jason's thigh, revealing the devastation beneath. The surgical incisions were neat, but between them the tissue was angry and swollen, with areas of discoloration that spoke of compromised blood flow. The drainage from the wound was serosanguineous, part blood, part serum, with an odor that suggested developing infection despite the powerful antibiotics. Jason, propped up on pillows, could see enough of the medical team's expressions to know the news wasn't good. When the examination was complete and fresh dressings applied, Dr. Khatri pulled up a chair. "I need to be straightforward with you, Jason," he began. "We're seeing signs of infection developing, and there are concerns about blood flow to the lower leg. The injury was extremely severe. The shark's teeth severed muscles, damaged your femoral artery and vein, and fractured your femur in multiple places." Jason nodded, his jaw tight. "What are my options?" Dr. Khatri appreciated the direct question. "We continue aggressive antibiotic therapy and close monitoring. If the infection responds and circulation remains stable, we proceed with additional surgeries to repair the muscular damage and stabilize the bone. Recovery would be long, months of rehabilitation, and you would likely have permanent limitations in function." He paused before continuing. "If the infection progresses or circulation deteriorates, we would need to consider amputation above the knee. This would remove the compromised tissue and give you the best chance at overall recovery, though obviously with a different set of challenges." The room fell silent as this information sank in. Jason's mother stifled a sob, while his father's hand tightened on the bedrail. Eleanor's face remained composed, but her eyes reflected the shock they all felt. "Time frame?" Jason asked finally, his voice steady despite the devastating news. "The next 24 to 48 hours will be decisive," Dr. Khatri replied. "We're doing everything possible to save your leg, Jason, but I need you to be prepared for all possibilities." After the medical team left, the room remained quiet, each person processing the news in their own way. Finally, Jason spoke. "It's going to be okay," he said, reaching for his mother's hand. "Whatever happens, people survive this. They adapt. They go on." His father nodded, blinking rapidly. "Damn right they do. And you've got all of us behind you, every step of the way." Elena moved closer, her scientific detachment finally cracking. "I've been researching prosthetic options," she admitted. Just in case. The technology is amazing now. Carbon fiber, microprocessor knees, activity-specific designs for swimming." Jason managed a small smile at her characteristic approach to crisis, gathering information, analyzing options, planning ahead. It was one of the things he loved about her. "Always prepared," he murmured, squeezing her hand. "Someone has to be," she replied, her voice catching. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Mike and Sarah, their faces somber as they took in the scene. "Bad timing?" Mike asked, hesitating at the doorway. "No," Jason insisted, grateful for the distraction. "Come in. How's everything at the beach?" Mike and Sarah exchanged glances before entering fully. "Beach is closed indefinitely," Mike reported. "Coast. Guards out looking for the shark, but so far nothing. And there's media everywhere," Sarah added. "They're calling it the Bayport bull shark attack on the news. We've been told not to talk to reporters." Jason wasn't surprised. Shark attacks, especially this severe, were media gold, combining primal fear, drama, and the allure of natural violence in a package guaranteed to boost ratings. His personal tragedy would be reduced to sensationalist headlines and dramatic reenactments. His name a footnote to the shark's starring role. "What about water testing?" Jason asked. "Is anyone Talking about the pollution that drew it in to begin with? Mike shrugged. The EPA's taken samples. The mayor's making noises about comprehensive environmental assessment. But between you and me, they're more focused on damage control than fixing the actual problem. This matched Jason's expectations. Bayport's economy was built on tourism and the commercial fishing industry, both of which would suffer from serious scrutiny of water quality issues. It was easier to frame the attack as a random act of nature than to acknowledge the human factors that had made it more likely. "We brought you something," Sarah said, changing the subject. From her bag, she produced a shark tooth, triangular, serrated and nearly an inch long. "They found this embedded in your wetsuit when they were cutting it off. The surgeon said we could keep it." Jason took the tooth, turning it over in his hand. It was surreally mundane, just calcium and connective tissue, evolved over millions of years into a perfect cutting implement. This small piece of anatomy had nearly cost him his life and might still cost him his leg. "Thanks," he said finally, unsure what else to say. What was the appropriate response to being given a souvenir of your own predation? The remainder of the visit passed with forced normalcy, updates on other team members, gossip about the mayor's press conference, speculation about when the beach might reopen. But beneath the casual conversation ran an undercurrent of unspoken fear, that Jason might never return to the job that had defined his adult life, that the team might have to continue without their leader, that the next time they entered the water, the memory of what had happened would go with them. As the day progressed, Jason's condition began to deteriorate. His temperature rose, his pain increased despite escalating medication, and the drainage from his wound became more purulent. By evening, the decision that had been hovering on the horizon all day could no longer be postponed. Dr. Khatri returned, with the orthopedic surgeon and vascular specialist, their expressions confirming what Jason already suspected. "The infection is advancing despite the antibiotics," Dr. Khatri explained, "and compartment pressures have reached critical levels. I'm sorry, Jason, but we need to take you back to surgery tonight, and we need to seriously discuss amputation as the safest course of action." Jason had been preparing himself for this possibility since waking up, but the reality still hit him like a physical blow. He looked at his parents and Elena, saw the grief and fear in their eyes, and made his decision. "Do what you need to do," he said, his voice hollow. Just make sure you get all of it. All the infection. I don't want to go through this again." Dr. Khatri nodded, understanding the implied consent. "We'll take good care of you, Jason. The surgical team is already being assembled." Within the hour, Jason was being wheeled to the operating room for the second time in 24 hours. This time, the goal wasn't to save his leg, but to remove it in a way that would give him the best chance at future mobility with a prosthetic. The surgeons would create a healthy, well-padded stump, carefully managing blood vessels and nerves to minimize phantom pain and maximize comfort with a prosthesis. As the anesthesia took hold, Jason's last conscious thought was of the ocean, not as it had been during the attack, murky and threatening, but as he had known it for most of his life, clear, blue, life-giving. He wondered if he would ever feel at home in it again. The bull shark continued her patrol of the coastal waters, moving methodically along the shoreline. The previous day's encounter had left her with a minor injury to her right eye, where Jason had struck her, but it hadn't significantly impaired her hunting ability. She had retreated temporarily after the concussive blast, but had remained in the area, drawn by the rich feeding opportunities. Now, her acute senses detected the approach of vessels on the surface, the Coast Guard and FWC boats searching for her. The engines created vibrations that traveled efficiently through the water, registering on her lateral line. These were not signals she associated with prey, but rather with potential danger. Instinctively, she adjusted her course, moving toward deeper water where the vibrations were less intense. This adaptive behavior had served her species well for over 20 million years, allowing bull sharks to survive in close proximity to the most dangerous predator on the planet, humans. While they occasionally came into conflict, the shark's ability to detect and avoid concentrated human activity was a key reason why attacks remained relatively rare despite the millions of people who entered the water each year. The pregnant female would remain in the general area, drawn by the abundant food sources, but would modify her patterns to minimize contact with the increased human presence. In a few weeks, she would seek out a quiet estuary to give birth to her pups, continuing the ancient cycle that had persisted through ice ages, mass extinctions, and the rise of human civilization. The shark, like the ocean itself, was indifferent to the human drama unfolding around it. It was simply living according to the dictates of its nature, in an environment increasingly shaped and altered by human activity. 3 days after the attack, with Jason still recovering from his amputation surgery, the mayor of Bayport held another press conference. This time, he was flanked by representatives from the seafood processing plant and the State Environmental Protection Department. After extensive water quality testing and consultation with marine biology experts, Mayor Whitmore announced, "We have determined that it is safe to reopen the northern section of Bayport Beach, effective tomorrow morning." A murmur ran through the assembled reporters. "What about the shark?" called out one. "Our partners at the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission and the U.S. Coast Guard have conducted thorough monitoring of the waters around Bayport for the past 72 hours, the mayor replied. "No large sharks have been observed in the vicinity of the public beaches." This was technically true, though it omitted the fact that the monitoring had been primarily focused on a relatively small area and that bull sharks were notorious for their ability to evade detection. "And the water quality issues?" asked another reporter. "The allegations of illegal dumping from the processing plant." At this, the corporate representative stepped forward, a polished woman in a crisp suit with the practiced smile of someone who had navigated many PR crises. "Seasta Seafood Processing takes environmental compliance very seriously," she began. "We have cooperated fully with all regulatory agencies and have agreed to implement enhanced waste management protocols as a good faith demonstration of our commitment to Bayport's natural resources." What she didn't mention was the hasty settlement agreement that had been negotiated behind closed doors, a modest fine that would be paid without admission of wrongdoing, coupled with promises of future compliance that would be monitored by an understaffed state agency. The agreement specifically shielded the company from liability related to the shark attack, citing insufficient scientific evidence to establish a causal link between their waste discharge and the presence of the bull shark. The press conference continued in this vein, with carefully crafted statements designed to reassure without promising too much, to acknowledge problems without accepting responsibility, to project action without committing to substantive change. For the residents of Bayport, the message was clear. Economic interests had prevailed over safety concerns, as they typically did in small tourist towns along the Gulf Coast. The beach would reopen, visitors would return, and life would go on, until the next incident forced another brief moment of reckoning. At Tampa Bay Medical Center, Jason was making steady progress in his recovery. The amputation site was healing well, the infection retreating under the onslaught of targeted antibiotics. Physical therapists visited daily, helping him maintain, strengthen his remaining muscles, and teaching him how to transfer safely from bed to wheelchair and back again. Mike had come by that morning with news from the department. Jason's job would be held for him, and the city had agreed to cover all medical expenses not paid by insurance. Both were significant victories, likely motivated more by fear of litigation than by genuine concern for his welfare, but welcome nonetheless. "They're reopening the beach tomorrow," Mike told him, watching for his reaction. Jason nodded, unsurprised. "Of course they are. Can't let one little shark attack interfere with the tourist season." "Lisa's implementing some new protocols," Mike continued. "No training in water with less than 6 feet visibility. 2 guards in the towers at all times with polarized glasses. Direct line to Coast Guard." "Good," Jason said. "That's good." He hesitated before asking, "Will you go back in?" The question hung between them, not just about returning to work, but about returning to the water that had nearly killed their friend. Mike considered it seriously. "Yeah," he said finally. "I will. Someone has to, but I won't lie. It'll be different now." Jason understood completely. Once you had seen what lurked beneath the surface, not just the theoretical possibility, but the visceral reality of it, you couldn't unsee it. Every shadow in the water would carry the memory of what had happened. Every unexpected touch against your leg would trigger the primal fear response that evolution had hardwired into human brains. "I keep thinking about the shark," Jason admitted. "Not hating it exactly, just wondering. Was it the same one that was spotted near Pelican Bay? Where is it now? Is it still out there doing what sharks do?" Mike shrugged. "Probably. They haven't found anything matching the description. Coast Guard's scaling back the search today. Jason nodded again, oddly relieved. As devastating as the attack had been for him personally, he didn't wish death on the shark. It had been acting according to its nature, in an environment humans had altered to make such encounters more likely. The true responsibility lay elsewhere, with regulatory failures, corporate malfeasance, and public indifference to environmental degradation. Later that afternoon, a visitor arrived that Jason hadn't expected. Dr. Marcus Reed, the marine biologist who had been part of the team searching for the shark. He introduced himself somewhat awkwardly, clearly unsure of his welcome. "I hope I'm not intruding," he began. "I wanted to see how you were doing, and also, well, I thought you might have questions about what happened, about the shark." Jason appreciated the scientist's directness. "I do, actually. Have a seat." For the next hour, Reed explained the biology and behavior of bull sharks in detail, their unique physiology that allowed them to move between salt and fresh water, their opportunistic feeding strategies, their role in the Gulf Coast ecosystem. He confirmed Jason's suspicion that the poor water quality had been a significant factor in attracting the shark so close to shore and making an attack more likely. "Bull sharks are usually ambush predators," Reed explained. "They prefer murky water where their superior senses give them an advantage over their prey. The conditions that day, low visibility, organic matter in the water, were essentially perfect for bull shark hunting behavior." "So it wasn't personal," Jason said with a hint of dark humor. Reed smiled slightly. "No, not personal at all. In fact, most shark attacks on humans are cases of mistaken identity or investigative bites. What made your case unusual was the sustained nature of the attack." "Lucky me," Jason murmured. "My theory, and it's just a theory, is that the combination of factors created a perfect storm," Reed continued. "The polluted water confused the shark's sensory input. The training exercise mimicked distressed prey behavior, and once the attack began, the group response might have triggered a feeding frenzy response." Jason absorbed this information, finding a strange comfort in the scientific explanation. The attack hadn't been a malevolent act, but a confluence of environmental circumstances and evolutionary programming. Tragic for him personally, but comprehensible within the framework of biology and ecology. "Will they catch it?" he asked finally. Reed shook his head. "Unlikely. And even if they did, they couldn't be certain it was the same shark. Bull sharks aren't particularly distinctive as individuals, and there are hundreds in the Gulf." He hesitated before adding, "For what it's worth, I'm glad they haven't found it. Killing that shark wouldn't make the waters any safer. It would just satisfy our human need for retribution." Jason found himself agreeing. What would make the waters safer is fixing the water quality issues that drew it in to begin with. "Exactly," Reed said, looking relieved at Jason's understanding. "But that's a much bigger, more complex problem than hunting down a single shark. It requires political will, regulatory enforcement, corporate accountability, things in short supply along the Gulf Coast." The conversation shifted to Jason's recovery and plans for the future. Reed, who worked with several adaptive sports programs for people with disabilities, offered to connect Jason with organizations that specialized in helping amputees return to aquatic activities. People with above-knee amputations surf, swim competitively, even dive with sharks, Reed told him. "When you're ready, if you're ever ready to get back in the water, these folks can help." The offer touched Jason deeply. Despite everything, the thought of never returning to the ocean was more painful than the physical trauma he had endured. The sea had been his workplace, his playground, his sanctuary for as long as he could remember. To lose that connection would be to lose an essential part of himself. "I'd like that," he said. "Not right away, but eventually." After Reed left, Jason sat by the window of his hospital room, looking out at Tampa Bay glittering in the distance. The water caught the late afternoon sun, transforming from blue to gold, revealing nothing of what moved beneath its surface. He thought about the shark, still out there somewhere, neither villain nor victim, but simply a creature following the imperatives of its existence. He thought about the murky waters of Bayport Harbor, now deemed safe by authorities who had never felt the crushing pressure of a predator's jaws. He thought about the long road of recovery ahead, the phantom pain that already haunted his missing limb, the challenges of learning to walk again with a prosthetic. Most of all, he thought about the ocean itself, vast, indifferent, essential. It had nearly killed him, had taken his leg and changed his life irrevocably. Yet even now, he felt its pull, the primal connection that drew humans to the water, despite the dangers lurking beneath the surface. One day, he would return to it, not as the same person who had entered those murky waters 3 days ago, but as someone transformed by the encounter, more cautious perhaps, more aware of human vulnerability in the face of nature's power, but ultimately unwilling to let fear define the boundaries of his life. The shark would continue its ancient patrol of the coastal waters, neither knowing nor caring about the human drama its actions had precipitated. The polluted waters would continue to flow into the Gulf, perhaps to be addressed by temporary measures before fading from public concern. The beach would reopen, tourists would return, and life in Bayport would gradually resume its normal rhythms. But for Jason Reeves, former senior lifeguard at Bayport Beach, nothing would ever be quite the same. He had entered the realm of the shark and returned, changed, diminished in body but expanded in perspective, carrying with him the visceral knowledge of what it meant to be, however briefly, not the dominant species, but simply part of the food chain. It was a knowledge few humans acquired and survived to contemplate. In that, at least, he had been fortunate. 6 months later, Jason stood at the edge of a different beach, some 50 miles down the coast from Bayport. The morning was clear, the water a transparent blue that revealed the sandy bottom beneath. His new prosthetic leg, a state-of-the-art carbon fiber model designed specifically for aquatic use, gleamed in the early light. Elena stood beside him, a wetsuit halfway zipped, her research equipment packed in waterproof cases. She had taken a position with a marine conservation organization that was documenting shark populations along the Gulf Coast, trying to establish baseline data that could inform protection efforts. "Ready?" she asked, studying his face for signs of hesitation. Jason took a deep breath, feeling the familiar mix of anticipation and apprehension that now accompanied any approach to the water. "As I'll ever be," he replied. They had chosen this location carefully, a protected cove with exceptional visibility, minimal boat traffic, and no recent history of shark sightings. It was as controlled an environment as the open ocean could offer, the ideal setting for Jason's first return to the water since the attack. He had prepared methodically for this moment, working with physical therapists to master the use of his prosthetic, attending counseling sessions to address the post-traumatic stress that still occasionally manifested in nightmares, even consulting with Dr. Reed about shark behavior and risk minimization strategies. None of that preparation could entirely eliminate the fear, of course. That was the nature of trauma. It rewired the brain, created new neural pathways that could be managed but never completely erased. Every time he approached the water now, his body remembered what his mind tried to forget: the crushing pressure, the helpless disorientation, the certainty of death that had accompanied those moments in the shark's jaws. But alongside the fear was something else, a determination not to let one terrible day define the rest of his life. The ocean had been his home long before it had become the site of his trauma. He would not surrender it without a fight. Jason took the first steps into the shallows, feeling the cool water swirl around his natural ankle and the waterproof housing of his prosthetic. His gait was different now, a slight hitch in his stride that the casual observer might not notice, but that remained a constant reminder of what he had lost. Elena moved alongside him, her presence a reassuring anchor as they waded deeper. When the water reached their waists, they paused, Jason adjusting to the sensation of buoyancy, altering the weight distribution on his prosthetic. "Good?" Elena asked. Jason nodded,